Śrimad-Bhagavatam class on Wednesday, the 17th of November. And we will start with chanting Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Munatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Giridharadhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Giridharadhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. A reading from Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 17. Punishment and Reward of Kali. And today we are reading from text 4. Papracharatamarudha Kaurashvara Pradicharam Megha Gambiraya Vacha Samaropita Kamuka Papracharatamarudha Kata Aspara Parichatam Megha Gambiraya Vacha Samaropita Kamuka Papracharatamarudha Katasvara Parichadam Megha Gambiraya Vacha Samaropita Kamaka Papracharatamarudha Katasvara Parichadam Megha Gambiraya Vacha Samaropita Kamaka Pracharatamarudha Kartasvara Parichadam Meghagambiraya Vacha Samaropita Kamuka. Papracha inquired. Ratam chariot. Arudha seated on. Katashvara gold. Parichadam embossed with. Megha cloud. Gambiraya exonerating. Vacha sound. Samaropita well equipped. Kamuka arrows and bow. Translation. Maharaj Pariksit, well equipped with arrows and bow, and seated on a gold embossed chariot, spoke to him, the Sudra, with a deep voice sounding like thunder. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. An administrative head or king like Maharaj Pariksit, with full majestic authority, well equipped with weapons to chastise miscreants, can challenge the agents of Kali. Then only will it be possible to counteract the degraded age. And in the absence of such strong executive heads, there is always disruption of tranquility. The elected show bottle executive head, as representative of a degraded public, cannot be equal with a strong king like Maharaj Pariksit. The dress or style of royal order does not count. It is one's actions which are counted. Om Ajna Timrandasha Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayarupa Gadamayam Dadati Swabhadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasudhi Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, when reading that verse in purport, the first thing that comes to mind is, growing up as a kind of growing up in the early 70s, and I guess we were still influenced by the kind of 60s peace movement and all of that kind of thing. Actually, the movement and the atmosphere that Srila Prabhupada arrived in America during, and he really resonated with that whole community that didn't want to go to war and all of that kind of thing, and rightly so. Who wants to go to war? But it's just interesting reading the verse in purport today that actually having a strong head, executive head, like Maharaj Pariksit, and of course the whole thing about war, if you like, as we learn from the Bhagavad Gita and from the Mahabharata, where you have the Pandavas who do everything possible to avoid that very outcome, this conflict, everything possible. They go to extraordinary lengths, as you're, I'm sure, quite aware. But in the ultimate issue, if you have a protagonist on the other side who is determined to go to war or to fight, then while you can do everything you can to avoid that eventuality, if there's just no option, you do need to be able to basically protect yourself, your army, and also the citizens of the country like that. So in that sense, if used for the right purpose, then having that strength is actually an important thing, and it effectively has the effect of maintaining peace, because if you're a strong leader and you have great military might like that, but your only purpose is to use it to protect, to use it in a defensive way rather than an aggressive way, if that's your motive, then that's actually a very good situation, because very few people will decide to start a war with you precisely for the reason because of your strength. And then if you're not motivated by starting unnecessary conflict, then that's a very good recipe and a very good situation for maintaining peace, actually. Because the reality is, going back to growing up in the early 70s and the influence of the peace and kind of hippie movement of the 60s still prevailing, that desire for peace, as Prabhupada talks about the Krishna conscious way of life, is the great peace formula for society. So that desire for peace is a glorious desire, but we also can't be naive about it, to think that we just leave ourselves completely unprotected, because there are unfortunately less noble forces in the world that will take advantage of that. So it's just an interesting kind of discussion around, what's the best formula, if you like, for maintaining that peace. So anyway, just reading today's verse and Prabhupada's purport just brought those kind of thoughts to the forefront of my mind. But overall, this whole section of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, it's actually quite an extraordinary, amazing study on the subject of mercy versus duty. And in this particular context, when we're talking duty, you could transfer that word duty to justice. So it's a really interesting exchange between Maharaj Pariksit and the personification of religion, Dharma, in the form of a bull. It's an incredible exchange. Dharma is representing, in the form of a bull, is representing the personification of religion, of religious principles, and that's where Dharma comes from. Religion doesn't mean Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, Jew, Muslim like that. That's not what religion is meant by the word religion in that context of Dharma. Dharma just literally means constitutional position as eternal spirit souls, and our constitutional duty in terms of how we honour that constitutional position like that. So that's Dharma, but we use the word personification of religion, but personification of Dharma, of the right thing to do. So that's Dharma here is being represented by the bull, and Maharaj Pariksit is representing duty. And as I say, in this particular context, you could translate the word duty into justice. So it's interesting, because since time immemorial, this goes back to the very first point in terms of war and how's the best way to avoid it. So this kind of point feeds into that since time immemorial, what we would refer to as the demoniac mentality exists in the material world. And how does that mentality, how does that manifest in front of us? One is by that mentality leads to what we see here in this pastime of Kali attacking Dharma, the personification of religion, and mutilating like that. So one way that we see that mentality in the world that we live in right now actually is the wholesale slaughter of Krishna's most cherished animal, the cow. Not the most beautiful. There's a nice conversation between Prabhupada and some of his devotees, where Prabhupada asks that question, what's the most beautiful animal? And one of the devotees responds with, oh, the cow, Srila Prabhupada. And cow says, no, the cow is not the most beautiful animal. It's the most cherished, it's the most loved animal, Krishna's most cherished animal, if you like. But it's not the most beautiful, and Prabhupada explains the horse is a much more beautiful from that external point of view than the cow is. But anyway, we see here as the cow is Krishna's most Krishna, his occupation is a cowherd boy. That's what he does. He looks after cows. So his kind of most cherished animal, if you like, is the cow. Of course, there's a whole science behind that as well, that the cow is giving us milk and it's one of our 7 mothers, etc. But we see in the material world, practically nobody pays attention to that, you know, and in essence, you know, most countries. And it's interesting now in the context of, you know, the whole discussion around climate change, that now we find that that industry, meat industry, etc., is one of the biggest contributors to this problem of global warming, of climate change. Anyway, that's just an aside. The principle is that the cow is one of our 7 mothers, and we shouldn't, not that we shouldn't harm or kill our mothers, I mean, that just goes without saying, but we should love and cherish and protect our mother like that. So anyway, since time immemorial, that mentality, that demonic mentality, has been present here in the material world. And one way that we can see it is the desire for people to basically continue what Kali started here 5,000 plus years ago. It's basically continue that, and one of the key things is the killing of cows. Literally, just our little country Ireland, you know, we kill more cows every year, or export cows every year, or kill them, a combination of both, than there are population of people in this country. It's just an extraordinary. It all goes on behind. We don't see it, you know. It's just all happening. You know? But yeah, it's just a continuation of what Kali started 5 years ago. So Dharma, so Dharma's been muted, and here Maharaj Pariksit, he feels his strong duty as that you know, ahead of society, to do the right thing, to protect Dharma and to try to do the right thing. But it's interesting because Dharma is almost resisting what Maharaj Pariksit is trying to do. There's a really interesting exchange between them when Maharaj Pariksit simply asks the question to Dharma, well, who did this to you? And Dharma goes into this whole philosophical presentation, and I think he cites 17 different possibilities of who might have done this to him from a philosophical point of view. But of course, he could have just pointed to him, to Kali, who was within vision, you know, just said, oh, there you go, Maharaj Pariksit, that's who did it to me. So what an incredible display of mercy. This tussle, if you like, or tussle, or you know, apparent discrepancy between these two dynamics of mercy and duty, or mercy and justice, like that. So Dharma is manifesting this principle of mercy, and you know, it could be argued that it's a little bit of a scattergun approach. That, you know, is it right to be just merciful all the time to everybody, regardless of the situation that that they have put themselves in, or that they have engineered? Is it right just to be kind of, if you like, you know, unconditional mercy? Is that always the right thing to do? But anyway, Dharma is manifesting this incredible, you know, incredibly big heart, you know, that is just looking to be merciful even to those who are actually directly harming him directly like that, still wanting to manifest that mercy. Whereas on the other hand, Maharaj Pariksit is feeling that no, my duty is to protect, and here's somebody, Kali, who has penetrated my kingdom and now is inflicting pain and suffering, completely unjustified pain and suffering on living entities or living creatures within my jurisdiction. I, as the head, the executive head, I have a duty to protect. So just those incredible, as I say, dynamic between these two things. And to discuss, well, what's appropriate, what's right, you know, just a very, very kind of interesting dynamic that's going on. And if we look at, you know, you can make an argument to say that as devotees, and from a Vaishnava point of view, from a devotee point of view, both culturally, philosophically, from many different perspectives, you could argue that mercy, ultimately trumps everything or dominates everything. Yeah, it's the ultimate goal is mercy over and above duty or justice like that. So those arguments can be made, but arguments can be made on the other side. But certainly in our tradition, our history, there are so many examples of virtually unconditional mercy being shown by the Lord, or Krishna, Lord Chaitanya, and their devotees. Virtually unlimited, unconditional mercy being shown. One nice example came across recently was Madhvacharya's explanation of why Kaliya was spared by Krishna. And it's interesting, as far as I'm aware, Kaliya was the only quote-unquote demon in Krishna's pastimes 5,000 or so years ago, just before the period of the Bhagavatam that we're discussing right now. Kaliya was the only demon that was spared. All the others perished, all the others died. Of course, that's glorious. These are all pastimes. You die at the hands of Krishna. You enter into his eternal Leela as a result of that. So it's all glorious, actually, that sometimes we can think, oh God, that sounds horrible, Krishna coming and killing people. But they are pastimes. They were demons also. It's the horrible things that they were doing. But ultimately they're liberated because they perish at the hands of Krishna. But for some reason, Kaliya was spared. He the only demon that didn't die. And one of the impressions is that, as to why that happened, is because Kaliya's wives kind of pleaded for him to be spared, because they would be left without a husband, and their children would be left without a father. And that's the kind of general understanding when we read this pastime in Krishna book. But Madhvacharya explains that actually the prayers of of his wives, firstly, while they could be construed as pleading for mercy, they also fully understood, his wives fully understood why Krishna was taking this action, because basically they knew that their husband was a complete rascal, and that's a nice way of putting it. So they fully understood that and accepted that. But Madhvacharya goes on to explain that just as Kaliya was effectively perishing, and Krishna's dancing on his all of his different hoods. Kaliya, of course, is a big serpent kind of demon that came out of the Yamuna River. He was poisoning the Yamuna, doing all sorts of horrible things. That can be reflected today. Amazing as well. Kaliya went in and he was poisoning the Yamuna. The Yamuna's sacred river, of course, none different, if you like, from Krishna, where all the devotees would go and bathe and all that kind of thing. And along comes this big rascal serpent demon and starts poisoning the whole river like that. That can be reflected today. The Yamuna's suffering, all the factories putting chemicals into it. You can go online and see, the horrible foam that's coming from these horrible chemicals and the poisoning of the Yamuna River. And so, yeah, as I say, the killing, Kali started the killing of animals. Now it's done wholesale in all these abattoirs and factories around the world, the wholesale slaughter of animals. But likewise, the poisoning of sacred rivers is going on too. So his wives were understanding that he was deserving of what Krishna was, the punishment or the mercy that we would call it, that Krishna was doling out on Kaliya. But he spared him in the end. But Madhvacharya explains that the reason why he spared him was that just prior to Kaliya, to his demise, he actually, in his heart, and of course Krishna is in our heart as Super Soul, Kaliya in his heart surrendered to Krishna. And once that surrender was made, then immediately everything changes. Once we surrender, and this is another interesting philosophical point, again, in the context of mercy versus duty or mercy versus justice, that justice is always applicable when it's deserved, of course, when someone's doing something wrong. Justice is, and Krishna creates this whole material world and uses the principle or the tool, if you like, of karma, the educational tool of karma, as a way to encourage people to do the right thing. So if I do the wrong thing, if I inflict pain and suffering on some person or some living creature unnecessarily, and it's nearly always unnecessarily, if I do that, then I do get a karmic reaction for that. So that's how karma works. If you do something wrong, you get a negative reaction. So it shouldn't be unusual for us to, or shouldn't be difficult for us to understand the principle of justice and duty. But as the example of Kaliya, and as explained by Madhvacharya, that example, we can understand that. But once you surrender, once you accept that you've done wrong, and it's not just accepting that you've done wrong, or that was a wrong thing to do, I won't do it again. It's accepting it in the context of our whole existence, and that we're eternal servants of the Supreme Lord. So once we not only accept that we've done wrong, we accept that that is the major wrong that we have done, and that leads to all the other wrongs, for want of a better way of putting it. So the major wrong is that we do not accept Krishna's authority, or the Supreme's authority. We rebel against that, thinking somehow or another we should be the center of the universe, or whatever it may be. So once we acknowledge that, and then surrender and accept the authority of the Supreme Personality, then everything changes, regardless of what we've done previously, both in this lifetime, but for all lifetimes previously. Everything changes simply because we now accept our constitutional position as being the eternal servant like that. So that's what Madhvacharya explains, that Kaliya, he surrendered to Krishna's authority. And once he did that, that's why he was actually spared. Then we have the famous purport from, so that's an example, a wonderful example of mercy. Mercy, just, literally unconditional mercy. Kaliya had done so many incredible things. Prabhupada talks in general actually about the demons in history, in Krishna's Leela, Ram Leela, etc. They were incredibly, they did incredible things. And Prabhupada says that the kind of modern day demons, if you like, we won't mention names, maybe we will mention names, people who just unnecessarily kill millions of people. You have the Mao Zedongs in China killing millions, the Stalins in Russia killed millions, of course we have Hitler in Germany killing millions, So you have so many of these people throughout history who are just, demons basically. But Prabhupada explains that they're just tiny, tiny specks of demons compared to ones that have existed before like that. So really, really, incredible things have actually been done. So Kaliya, same in that category, incredible stuff that he had done. But yet this practically unconditional, unlimited mercy is offered even to those personalities. What to speak of the likes of us, who, we may have those tendencies in our heart, but certainly haven't carried them out to the degree of the personalities that we just mentioned. But even them, and greater than them, unlimited mercy, unconditional mercy is available. Just that one ingredient from our side. We accept that we're the eternal servants, and we don't rebel against that. So that's mercy. But then duty, as I say, the famous purport in the Bhagavad Gita 2.14, to the matras pashastu kampaya shitosna sukha-dukkha agamaya pino nichas tam pratikshasva bharat. That verse is explaining the nature of the material world, that the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress. So it's non-permanent. So sometimes in this material world we may feel some kind of happiness, sometimes we feel distress like that. So the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, they are like the coming of the winter and the summer seasons. They arise through sense perception. We're now in November, it's getting colder. And if we go out, our hands or whatever, our nose, whatever it might be, the parts of us that are exposed will feel cold, whereas in the summer we don't feel that. So it arises out of sense perception. And one must learn to tolerate them. We must learn to tolerate those, ultimately simply because we're not the body, it's not us. Yes, we feel the pain of the body because of the connection that we have with it presently. But the more that we can learn to transcend and rise above the oscillation of the experiences that we have related to the body in the material world, like heat or cold, happiness and distress, etc., the more we can learn to tolerate them, the better it is, of course, for us. So that's the verse. And then in the purport, Prabhupada gives two examples and about duty, like that. The first example he gives is, I think, actually I'm not sure what order they come in, but the two examples are, one is of a mother, a housewife like that, cooking in the, he's talking about India actually, and he's talking that people and families, they have to eat 365 days a year. So in the wintertime, you may go into a kitchen and light the stove, etc., and it's a nice pleasant place to be because you're generating heat. But in the summertime, and particularly in a country like India that's a lot warmer and hotter than we experience in Western Europe, that becomes a great austerity. You know, can you imagine it's 40 degrees, the temperature is 40 degrees, and you go into a kitchen and start lighting stoves and flames, you know, to cook meals. It just becomes almost intolerable. But the housewife, the mother, etc., out of duty, she does not consider that, and she simply cooks every day. And then he also gives the example of the brahmana, the kind of the brahmana, the priestly class, like that, that traditionally they would shower, you know, twice, even 3 times a day they would shower. Again, in the summertime, in a place like India, when the temperature is 40 degrees, I've done it many times, and you go down to the river, to the Ganga or to the Yamuna, anyway, you go down to one of these rivers, and it's actually a pleasure to jump in. You immediately feel relief, and you feel a cooling sensation from the hot heat of the day, like that. So it's really, really pleasurable. But probably to explain, but brahmanas, they don't just bathe and have their shower 2 or 3 showers a day in the summertime. They also do that in the wintertime. And in the wintertime, when the temperature drops much lower, and then you go into the river that's been cool all throughout the winter, it's freezing cold, like that. But Prabhupada says, out of duty, they do that because it's their duty to be clean, both internally and also externally. So they're wonderful examples of duty. So again, in one sense, the two principles, you could argue, have an element of conflict, or they conflict with each other. But both of them are absolutely glorious. Both of those, duty and mercy, are glorious principles. And it's just good for us to explore these things and see what the dynamic is and what the relationship is between the two. And both of those examples, there's another explanation given by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and he's talking that about Kamsa and Devaki, and of course they're related, Kamsa and Devaki, but still Kamsa, having understood that Devaki was about to give birth to Krishna, and Kamsa, of course, big demon, another big demon, was completely totally apprehensive is the wrong word. He was consumed with this, you know, that wow, this person's coming and this person's going to challenge my authority, like we talked earlier about rebelling to Krishna's authority. So he wanted to kill his own sister's child, like that, you know, because of this fear that he had. So that's what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur talks about. The Kamsa is representing fear, and Devaki is representing bhakti, or devotion. And when one fears Maya, when you fear Maya, then Krishna, it becomes suitable for Krishna to, because it's already in their hearts, but to manifest fully in their hearts on that principle. And when one creates fear, so when one is afraid of Maya, and actually there's a nice story between Prabhupada and again some of his disciples, and one of them asks Srila Prabhupada, because he's kind of marveling at the fact that Prabhupada just seems to be impervious to the influences of Maya and the influence of the material energy, whereas for most mortals like us, it's a struggle, you know, it's a challenge, you know, that we always have to be on our guard, and if we don't have our guard ready, then Maya can easily slip into our minds and slip into, and we start doing things that we shouldn't be doing. Whereas Prabhupada seemed completely impervious to that. And so this disciple, devotee, asked Srila Prabhupada, how is it that you you're able to deal with Maya, like that, and whereas we become affected by Maya's influence. And Srila Prabhupada said the only difference between me and you is I have a healthy fear of Maya, like that. So when you have that healthy fear of Maya, Krishna comes and protects you. As I say, he's already in our heart, but he actively will protect us if we have that healthy fear of the material energy. Whereas when we create that fear, which is what Canto was doing here with his sister, then we invite in lust and anger and greed and envy and illusion, madness, all these horrible anarthas or unwanted things. We invite them into our heart, and we create a fertile ground for them to grow and develop. And that's why Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is explaining, and you can read this in various Srila Prabhupada's books, but that's why Krishna, prior to appearing, he killed all those anarthas like that. So yeah, all these nice examples, and to help us understand these different dynamics are there, because as I say, it's a very absorbing discussion, and it lends to further further exploration of this topic. And one thing that we also need to consider is our own natures, what our natures are. So we may consider, for instance, that we may think mercy is a higher principle than duty or justice. That's debatable, by the way, in and of itself. But let's say someone is considering like that. But if there's someone like Maharaj Pariksit, i.e. they have Kshatriya, a Kshatriya nature, and a Kshatriya nature is that nature that goes along with administrative heads and military, etc., like that, where protection is a key thing, that they must protect people and protect the people who are looking to them for protection, like that. Then it would be inappropriate. It would be inappropriate for Maharaj Pariksit, who has that nature, to suddenly decide, oh yeah, we'll just let all these people, we'll just be merciful to them, even if they're not deserving of it, that they're not fearful of Maya, that they haven't, as Kaliya did, surrendered to Krishna. No, they're still completely creating fear, creating all these anarthas of lust, anger, greed, envy, illusion, madness, etc. They're actually going about creating or encouraging all of those anarthas. Then for a person like Maharaj Pariksit just to decide, okay, everyone, it's kind of like, somebody going to all the prisons in Ireland today, the government deciding, oh, we'll just open all the doors and let everybody free, we want to be merciful. And then next thing you have people who haven't surrendered, their mentality hasn't changed, now they're out on the streets, and that they're a threat to society like that. So as I said, that principal quality of defiance, or of Maya, if you like, is defiance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And you could argue that it's characterized by, or it's nicely explained by one aphorism, Atmavan Manyate Jagat. Atmavan, the mind, Atmavan, me, the person, Manyate, the mind, Jagat, the universe, that we think we're the center of the universe. And once we think that, first off, it doesn't mean that it's true. In fact, it's completely untrue. We're not the center of the universe. But if we're thinking like that, then the actual center of the universe, the person who created it and owned it, it's kind of like, you might own a house like that, and you created that house, or etc. You bought that house, whatever it may be. Then that's your little domain, kind of thing, and you have a right as the head of the family or whatever it might be, to utilize that facility, the home, the house, as you deem fit. It's not for some stranger off the street to come in and decide, okay, this is mine. So similarly, Krishna, Ham Pravasha Prabhuvo, Matar Savam Prabhatate, that Krishna, he has created all these universes, all the material world, all the spiritual world. Krishna is the creator, he's the source of everything. Ishvara Parama Krishna. So for us to come into what he's created and decide and take it for our own, that's just, we're like thieves basically, and it's just a complete illusion. So we have to get rid of this mentality that somehow or another we're the center of the universe. And it's explained throughout Srila Prabhupada's books, different books, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Asat-samrityage Vaishnava-cha, that we should seek the association of devotees, people who are not attached to that illusion that somehow or other we're the center of the universe. They've shed that. They understand their constitutional position. So that we should seek association from those personalities. And one moment's association, sadhu-sanga, sarva shastra-kai, lava-matra, sadhu-sange, sarva siddhi hoy. That just one moment, and I think actually the breakdown is given like 1/10, literally 1/10 of a second of the association of a pure-minded devotee of Krishna who's completely free from all of these material concepts on any level. Some people are really grossly rooted in the material concept, other people are progressing through it, but even any subtle influence, these pure devotees, they're completely free of all of that. So one moment's association with personalities like that brings us liberation. We become liberated from the material energy, from the material world. But on the other hand, without that understanding, it leads us into so many problems, both for us personally, but also for society in general, because it's just based on the wrong premise, thinking that somehow or another we're the most important thing, we're the center, we're the controllers, etc. It just leads to so many problems. And as I mentioned earlier, they grapple with them all the time, all these different things that come along in the material world, the unintended consequences of our actions, because they're not based on, they're not actions that we should be performing, that they're contradictory and in conflict with who we are and what our constitutional position is. So take, for instance, climate change. If you think about it, the topic of the day, if you like. But what are the essential reasons for that? There are two kind of main reasons. And the first one is consumption, or as Srila Prabhupada would translate that word, in his purports, he would use the word sense gratification. And, so the non-devotees will use the word consumption. But that's what the driving force is for climate change. People want to consume all the time. Everybody wants to have as best a facility for consuming, and whatever that consumption may be. Obviously that consumption can be food, we consume that, but everything, media, people will consume that. But all of these things, that people want to consume require energy and transportation and so many different things, and they lead to the problem that we now face. So we can try to adjust that so that, for instance, cars, that's another thing that we consume. We want to have vehicles, we want to have cars. Why? They're convenient. They can get us from A to B quickly, and this, that, depending on traffic. But they can get us to A to B quickly. They're comfortable. We're in our own space. We don't have to go onto a train or a bus or whatever it may be. But they add to this problem. Now the interesting thing is, then they say, well, let's change to electric cars. That will solve it. Get rid of diesel, get rid of petrol, and change to electric. But the reality is that if we still want to consume, because even now they're talking about, for instance, electric cars, that to get the batteries for them, etc., they have to get all this lithium out of mines in Africa, this, that, and the other. So it may be better than petrol, etc., and diesel. It may be better. It will be an improvement. I guess it will be. They tell us it will be, but it doesn't eliminate the problem. And it's amazing that we kind of refuse to look at the root. We look at the symptoms, but we don't look at the cause, So the symptoms are what they are, as we well know. But what's the cause? The cause is consumption. It's not how we consume. That may have some effect and reduce things here, and we can adjust things. But the ultimate cause is consumption. And we don't want to face that. We don't want to deal with that, because we're in the material world. And sense gratification is the one thing that is the thing that people think are going to make them happy. It doesn't make them happy, but that's what they think, and therefore it's very difficult for them to stop consuming. And then the other one is that what right do we have to exploit nature and trash nature? What right do we have to do that? And really, the bottom line is that people don't either understand or they don't accept where nature's coming from. It's part of the creation of Krishna. It's part of the creation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we're here and we can utilize it, but we have to utilize it in a certain way. It's not that we can just exploit it unlimitedly and just treat it as though as some kind of order supplier for our needs. That's actually not like that. And it's interesting because of that disconnect between the creation of nature, where nature actually comes from, who's the source of nature, that disconnect between that, it's hardly surprising then when people go to a temple for whatever, for their first time or whatever, and they see the deity form of Krishna, that they will accept that Krishna is existing in his own deity form. They don't exist that if you don't exist that or don't accept that nature is coming from a superior source, then it's just by definition you're denying the existence of that, and that denial of a superior force, and that there's a person, a creator behind everything that we well, that there's a creator behind the world that we're living in. Yes, then that mentality comes in. Well, then it's mine. I'll take it. And you see that anyway. Whatever about the environment, you see that as a cause of conflict in the world anyway. That if everyone's thinking, well, I can exploit this any way I like, then if somebody else gets in our way of our desire to exploit, then we have conflict with them. And of course, that's manifested on a far wider level, then a far greater level in the context of countries. They will take that view, and they'll dispute borders and dispute resources and all of these kind of different things, and it leads to conflict and it leads to war. So yeah, this is what it comes down to. It comes down to these anarthas of lust, anger, greed, envy. We're envious of others. We see other people. There's that English phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. So we become envious of others. And envy is such a destructive, such a corrosive, unwanted thing. Anartha, terrible kind of one of the worst ones, if you like, of them. And actually, Chanaka Pandit, a great philosopher, a great sage from times gone by, he said that even snakes can be charmed. Snakes are seen as kind of one of these quite envious type animals that, particularly animals that will attack you without reason. So wasps kind of fall into that category, scorpions, biting insects like that. So snakes are considered like that, but they can be charmed. And you see that, you see that in India, the snake charmers. But you'll see that they can be controlled, they can actually be charmed. The Chanaka Pandit says that, however, envious men cannot be like that. And you think, again, I mentioned Hiranyakashipu and people like that, in Lord Nrsingadeva's Leela, Ravana, in Lord Ram's Leela, these people were just so envious of Krishna's position, even up to the very departure of Hiranyakashipu's last words. Basically, he was challenging Lord Vishnu to because he felt he was protected by his boons he had got from Lord Brahma, so he was challenging Lord Vishnu, come on, take me on, I'm ready for you, etc. So this is the interesting dynamic between mercy and justice. And in one sense, and I'll finish on this, in one sense, adding to the argument, for want of a better word, or the presentation, that that mercy ultimately is superior to justice. And I suppose the reason, that the best argument really, or best presentation, is that yes, Krishna himself, through his law of karma, and also through his devotees like Maharaj Pariksit, justice has to be there, duty has to be there, and justice has to be there. But ultimately, Krishna wants us all to go back to the spiritual world, get out of this crazy place that we're in at the moment, this material world, and be free from the need for anybody to be having to administer justice, whether it be Krishna through his system of karma or through his devotees like Maharaj Pariksit. That just, there is no need for that anymore. If what Krishna is really desiring for us and really wanting us to do, if we reciprocate with that, then we will go back to the spiritual world, and the need for justice, the need for duty in that sense will be free, and we'll be in the protection of Krishna. We won't be influenced by any of these anarthas that exist here in the material world, and therefore, as I say, there'll be no need for the administering of justice to us. And ultimately we can achieve these incredible, what's the word? These incredible, we can enter into Krishna's world, basically, is maybe the best way of saying it, Gopikana darshane krishnera yeyanandahai. That when devotees who have attained that, that's particularly talking about the gopis, Krishna's, if you like, best devotees. But when we do that, when we surrender, when we realize the folly of this material world and our entanglement in it and all our logic, reason and argument for doing what we do, when we actually realize that was all a waste of time, we are just literally in the wrong place. We shouldn't be here. Our home is with Krishna in the spiritual world. When we realize that, the gopis are expressing that, not the gopis are expressing, but it's we're informed that the gopis, they're experiencing pleasure that is 10 million times greater than even the pleasure Krishna himself is receiving or deriving from seeing the gopis, from engaging with them. But the point is that far from us, because this is the incredible dynamic between justice and mercy and the discussion around that we've been having. Another amazing one is that the more we understand and of course accept and embrace that we're eternal servants, it's the more we do that, the more liberating it is. Somehow or another, the material concept is, if I'm a servant, then how can I ever be happy being a servant? I don't want to be the servant, I want to be the master. But actually, that's a material concept, and therefore, as Prabhupada explains so many times, this material world is a perverted reflection of the spiritual world. So in the spiritual world, rather than the concept of servant being somehow or another restricting or limiting or will not bring us the joy and the happiness that we want, because we're thinking from a material point of view, that means I have to be the boss, I have to be the master, not the servant. No, it's the exact opposite in the spiritual world. So here we see it being explained that the gopis, because of their surrender, because of them understanding their constitutional position as the eternal servants of Krishna, their joy that they experience as a result of that is 10 million times greater even than the master, Krishna. An incredible science. Spiritual science is just such an incredible science, and if we can just follow Srila Prabhupada, absorb ourselves in his words, his teachings, yes, we will be realizing things that we just could never ever have conceived of. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.